Welcome back, everybody, to Serie Chronicles. It's another slightly odd week at the end of the football season. I feel like we've been doing a couple of these recently where we're not quite sure where the big action is. It feels like maybe the big action is the action for Italian clubs, at least happening in midweek in the Europa League, because a lot of the big questions in Serie have been resolved. We know who's winning the league. We know who's going to be pretty much the top four. Maybe the top five is a little bit more of a conversation, but we did still have a game this weekend that stands out, so we'll head straight there, which is Roma against Juventus. Mina and Patrick Kendrick are with me as always. Mina, I'll just give you one name: Mina Rizuki and Patrick Kendrick.
I'm like Madonna.
Mina's like Madonna. And yeah, let's go straight to the Stadio Olimpico, because Roma are in the middle of their Europa League semi-final against Bayer Leverkusen. I did a little voice note on Thursday about how things went. Obviously not great is the answer. They had this game sandwiched in between against Juventus where it didn't feel so consequential, because Juventus are third, looking pretty set in that top four. Roma, as Patrick had talked about on last week's podcast, will qualify for next season's Champions League if either they or Atalanta win the Europa League. So they've got an extra in there. But that might not happen. And so the top five is still relevant for them. So this was a game they did want to win. And surprisingly, I thought, if anything, Juventus looked like the slightly better team in this one. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, like a stopped clock, I guess twice a season Allegri needs to be right, doesn't he? So,
Oh, that's
yeah.
so mean.
No, but they're due a good performance every now and then, Juventus, because they do have a better squad than people give them credit for. And I think Chiesa looked very bright and sharp, and he was dashing around the pitch, and it was like the Chiesa of old. Whether he's able to then sustain that remains to be seen. I've got a hunch that he's going to turn it on in the Coppa Italia final, because he seems to save his best performances for the Coppa Italia, the 2020 Euro notwithstanding. But I think you're right. Yeah, it's a tricky one for Roma, because if Atalanta get to the Europa League final and win, then Roma obviously could benefit from that. And equally, if Atalanta then get to the Europa League final, then they're going to be more fatigued as well. And given that Roma's next match is against Atalanta, it seems to be all in their favour to cheer them on. But there's been a lot of barbs which have already been exchanged between the whole Evan Ndika situation now. Gasperini getting annoyed about the fact that, I mean, we'll probably get into that on another show because that's quite long-winded. But I think coming back to Juventus and their trip to Rome, it was quite an open game. I didn't expect it because, as you said, Roma were fatigued. Juventus typically try and shut down big games like this, and often they're happy with a clean sheet and, where possible, a 1-0 win. We saw that earlier in the season. They beat Roma in December with a goal from Rabiot. They beat Napoli earlier on in the season, a goal from Gatti. So typically they've done okay in these matches. But it was quite open. Sfila had to make lots of saves. The Roma goalkeeper, Szczęsny, had to make a save later on to deny Tammy Abraham. I was a little bit surprised. That makes me think that finally maybe Juventus have just decided to release the shackles, and they're perhaps disregarding a little bit of what the head coach is saying to them.
Support for Serie Chronicles is brought to you by Manscaped, who are the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Shaving your jewels doesn't have to be risky business anymore, thanks to the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra.
This trimmer is all about keeping things smooth and safe so you can trim with confidence. Treat your boys down there and join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com to get 20% off plus free shipping with code Serie. With Manscaped, it's easy grooming, no surprises. So, I actually gave my shaver to my best friend. Because, I don't really understand that much about these things. And I sort of was laughing about it because I was like, why do you guys get so excited about shavers? But he was really excited. And I don't know if that's the usual reaction to get something like that. I was like, oh, it's really good, actually. So is that normal or is that just weird?
Yeah, I think it's a great gift idea. It's the sort of thing where I think men, I don't want to come across with a sweeping gender stereotype, but here you go. I think typically men probably wouldn't buy this for themselves, but I think it's an excellent gift idea. It's the sort of thing where if you're given it, and I was very grateful to Manscaped for having given me this wonderful kit, Exhibit A, which has got all sorts of things in it. We've got a crop smoother. We've got a crop preserver and a couple of very handy gadgets with all of the various things that you need, beautifully presented. And I actually gave it a whirl. I'll spare you the details, but it's very good. It's very effective, because the thing you're most concerned about is obviously not cutting yourself. It's quite a delicate area. Again, I'll try and spare you any more details than that, but it does allow you to, it's hygienic, it's safe, it was very smooth. I was then able to moisturize, again, something I wouldn't ordinarily do. But when you're given this lovely presented package with all of these shavers and creams and ointments and so on and so forth, and the various gradings so you can get the length right, it's quite a nice, it's treating yourself. And I don't think men treat ourselves enough. And I think whereas women typically might go and see the beautician and go for a wax or what have you, you don't really, as a man, certainly in my experience, I've never gone and done likewise. So the idea that I could then, in the comfort of my own home, tend to that particular area of my anatomy was nice. So I'd like to thank Manscaped for that. And I was, you're a little bit wary of it initially and you think, I don't need that. But then as and when you use it, I have to say, you are now preaching to the converted. I'm a Manscaped fan.
Same as me, right? I had to find someone else for mine. I gave mine actually to one of my best friend's husbands, which is a conversation to have with your best friend about is an appropriate gift to give to your husband. But I checked in on him before because I knew we were going to be talking about this, and he seems very, very pleased as well, echoing a lot of what Patrick said. And he said actually the nose and ear trimmer that came in the kit was also really great as well. So definitely some good tools for all sorts of grooming actually from Manscaped. So well worth checking out if any of that sounds like something you might like, or also, as we've all just been saying, for a gift idea as well, maybe.
Yeah.
Also, Patrick, that is actually a really good point, because a lot of the times that, I'll, like for my birthday or whatever it is, people will buy me all these kits with like lotions and potions or like gift cards or anything that sort of, beautifies you, or use these lotions. And there's really nothing that I feel like I could get for a man on that occasion. So it's really horrible presents a lot of the time. Like, here's a tie or here's a pair of socks.
Yep.
This kind of makes you, it's also the lotions and potions I do think it's a really nice touch when you give that box, because it looks very impressive. So I think it's also a really great gift idea.
Absolutely. It's wonderful.
So you can get 20% off and free shipping, just to remind you guys, with the code Serie at manscaped.com. If you are thinking this sounds like something you want, please do use that code. It helps us out, guys. We'd love you to do that. There's 20% off as an added incentive to do it. Free shipping with that code Serie at manscaped.com. Show your balls some love and feel free as a dove.
Well, maybe. Do you remember in the Coppa Italia when it was against Lazio in the first leg, when they were just terrible in the first half, and then in the second half they switched it on and they asked Allegri what happened, and he said, well, I just told them to go forward. So maybe he just told them to go forward on this occasion, some clever tactical messaging there, so we can get a better performance. It's interesting with Chiesa, because I think this is the first time that we've seen him sort of really shine in a game, and yet he didn't get a goal. And it's annoying as well that he got taken off. So quite a few questions as to why this keeps happening. Another thing is just that I find this is a running theme now in Serie A. It's a lot of good play, a lot of good movement by some of these strikers, but not enough of not enough end product. And I look around and I wonder what is going on, because I do feel like in Italy we have some of these players that create a lot or do a lot, but the level of consistency being shown in terms of that actually translating into assists or goals it's not good enough. Whereas once upon a time, what I used to think about Italy was that it's a super efficient league. So you would only create like a few chances perhaps, but they would all be converted quite well. And so especially with Juventus, let's say, that was always how I used to look at it. They were just, for ages in the Champions League, they would just look like the team that was below par, even in the heydays of 2017 and 15. And yet they would only need a couple of chances, and Higuain or Tevez or Morata or someone would come through and it would just be goals. And then the other team would be like, how did this happen? And now I just think of it as being the other way. There's also something to be said about Juventus that just don't really know how to create from open play. Everything is either a cross converted with a header, or it's something from a set piece. So attacking play is something that we've obviously beaten them with a stick. And as for Roma, I think they're just exhausted. But the question is why did McKennie say Juventus are exhausted? You're playing one game a week. Like, what's going on? You know?
Yeah, it's just I feel like I maybe came in a bit too bleak on that intro. It's just it does feel like to me, looking around Serie A this weekend and perhaps last week as well, there's a lot of these games really feel like end of season games, and it feels like there's this energy in a lot of the league where it's like, okay, we're kind of there now. We're at the end of this marathon, and we're staggering across the line. And as you said, Mina, Juventus have the least right to feel like that because they didn't go to the Supercoppa. They haven't been in Europe. Yes, they've gone to the Coppa Italia finals, so that's something. But in general, they've played a lot of fewer games, and perhaps that's why they were sharper than Roma in this game. Roma really did look wiped out to me, and perhaps there's something in Federico Chiesa just being a little bit healthier and buzzing again. He's such a particular footballer. I feel like we've talked around him just over and over again without the narrative really changing in these last few years, because it feels like we all see this potential in him. We all see the possibilities in Federico Chiesa. We all saw him at Euro 2020 being such a dynamo for Italy. And I still have the same frustrations with him anyway, where I say, yeah, just look up a bit more. If you could just not always be looking down, if you could sometimes be a bit more generous. But he did set up a goal in this game, with a nice cross for Bremer. And he really showed us that best of himself again with that shot that came off the post. I think it was Christensen. He turned inside out. Really nice, drag back and completely wrong-footing the defender. He really has got all this in him. It's just that he's now 26 and are still waiting for it to happen, if you know what I mean.
But do you not think a lot of what you see from him are just these individual moments of brilliance, like him taking everyone on? And it's the same issue I have sometimes with Kvaratskhelia. It's not enough. I mean, Juventus don't play enough as a team anyway, but it's not always thinking ahead of how he can help the team, but rather thinking ahead of how he can be good himself. And I think he's too individualistic in his way, and he deserves a lot of freedom and to play like that, because when he turns it on, he's really special. But that for me is something that I don't really like to see, particularly in my team. I don't know how to explain this. I don't like players that are brilliant when they're left alone and allowed their freedom. I like players who are brilliant for the team. And I think that he is coming, even in the last match, when he came on with Milik at the time and tried to do something. Who did they play in their last match? I completely forgot last week.
It shows how memorable the games have been. Milan last week.
Right. Yeah, it was Milan. Yeah. And I do, he does, as soon as he comes on, right, everything changes. You realize there's a little bit more electricity. There is a little bit more there is something going to happen, because he is somebody who can change the way that the game is being played. But again, it seems a lot reliant on what he can do in terms of brilliance, rather than what he can extract from his teammates around him. So it's that kind of thing that he for me is in that same category with a few other players that I'm never sure about, because at this level, his age, he should be able to be a bit more of a team player, to have developed more into a team player. And I agree with you, Nikki, it's still head down a lot of the times. It's still somebody that I'm not sure I want to rely on for 90 minutes to rescue me. But I do think that I can always bring him on, and I will provoke a reaction. He will do something special. I just don't know necessarily if that will lead to my team's win.
I think he's quite a limited player in terms of his tactical intelligence, to be honest.
Exactly,
I don't think he has the highest footballing IQ, which is not necessarily a problem. I think he's got a set of physical gifts and close control that allows him to be a devastating player. And I was trying to think now, just as we were discussing Chiesa, often footballing nations develop a similar type of profile. They have a handful of different profile of players. If you look back down the years, you can name at least 5 or 6 old school Italian number 10s from the 90s who would have a similar sort of playing style. You could say Del Piero, Baggio, Totti. They're all from a similar sort of bloodline there. But I'm trying to think if Italy have ever produced a player like Federico Chiesa. I was thinking back now, and I can't think of anyone that had that sort of very direct, searing pace down the wing and cutting in and shooting and curling the ball into the far corner. He's almost like an Italian and Nicky's probably going to vomit at the mention of this, but there's a little bit of Thierry Henry about him in the way that he surges in from the left-hand side and tries to bend into the far corner. I'm saying it's a sort of Thierry Henry light. Obviously, he's nowhere near as consistent, but I think it is that sort of thing. And I think Henry was a much more intelligent player. He could do a lot more with Chiesa, but I think it's that sort of profile. And I think that Italy don't have too many players that can be match winners. I've always had my reservations about Chiesa. I think he peaked at Euro 2020. And I think, unfortunately, we saw someone at their peak. And I think there's only so long you can use the injury as an excuse. And I hope he's able to recapture that level. But even if he doesn't, I think Italy should be grateful that he was able to turn it on in a tournament where, lest we forget, he wasn't even a starter for many of those matches as well. And I think that could be his role. If the game is tight, you can get him on and then just give him the ball and say, make things happen, to be honest. So, but I can't think of a single Italian player from the past or anyone current that has a playing style even remotely similar to his, which is both a blessing and a curse, I think.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I think it's something that I've thought about before when you talk about player profiles that are missing in certain, not missing, but less common in certain leagues. And it's why I think you get certain players who have a tremendous immediate impact, and then once they get more understood, that impact drops off quite sharply. And the one I always think of as my most extreme example is Juan Manuel Iturbe, who had that moment where like you had teams literally stealing him off each other because everyone was so excited by him. And suddenly it was like, actually, he's not that special, is he? He's just direct and willing to run at people. And once you realise that doesn't happen that often in Serie A, but you can defend against it, suddenly it started to look a lot less scary, which is interesting because some of what Chiesa does is the same thing: run at people, be willing to dribble at someone, which has. It's not never existed, but I think it's been more rare in Italy than it has been in certainly, say, the Premier League, where you've seen a lot of those kinds of players. I think that's a really interesting point about Chiesa.
Do you not think he would belong? I know this sounds crazy, but in a team in which that is a little bit more horizontal, and he can be the guy that makes them more vertical, like the outlet for that, run, would he not be better suited to that?
I was curious, actually. I mean, maybe this is not an answer to the question, Mina, but I'm so curious because there was this rumor, and I think it's just pure agent talk trying to help his client get some more money in the deal. But this rumor about Roma coming in for him because he's only got 1 year left on the contract after this summer. I was curious to know what you would think about that. You don't want them to keep him, you want him to go.
Well, it depends. Can I get Pellegrini? Because I'm a big fan of Pellegrini. I really, really like Pellegrini.
Yeah, I don't see him leaving Roma to go to Juventus.
I know. This is what's upsetting me.
It's one thing Pjanic and Benassia, but I don't see it happening with Pellegrini, to be honest. So, yeah.
You don't want Dybala back instead?
No, it's okay. I mean, Dybala's been brilliant, but no. Dybala, it's that kind of player. They're just these. Oh, I don't know. Dybala, Leao, Chiesa, Vlahovic, they all fall into this one bracket that for me is not top level football. And you'll think I'm crazy.
The best thing for Chiesa's career, and maybe even for Italy as a consequence of this, would be for him to go to the Premier League. I think his style is perfectly suited to the Premier League. He's very direct. He's very quick. There's a lot of transition. There's a lot of,
but there's millions of people like him there, and he's not. There's a lot like that, which is I don't think he'll stand out because I don't think he's better than them.
I don't think he needs to stand out. I think he needs to fit in, to be honest.
That's why I actually think Spain is better for him, because I think if you are a team like Barcelona that is capable of keeping the ball, that has intelligent players around you, and then you allow this man some vertical freedom to convert all of that possession into a more direct threat, change of pace will be electrifying for everyone, and then he could really show off his freedom. But when everyone else has all this steering freedom and not that much tactical intelligence, I think he'll just be one of many.
Well, you say that, Mina, but having it's only just come into my head, this thought, but some of those criticisms that we're levelling at Chiesa, I might also have levelled at Nicolo Zaniolo. And I'm not saying it's been perfect for him at Villa, but he's done okay.
Pretty much been awful. They don't want to keep him. I mean, he's had one or two performances. Like the fans haven't been on his side. I don't necessarily. And Zaniolo, I mean,
it's a different body shape, though, isn't it? Zaniolo's 6'3",
and Zaniolo's so physical.
He's not as quick. He's quite upright, and obviously he bulked up a lot after his knee injury. Whereas Chiesa's a lot big. He's shorter and he's quicker and a lower centre of gravity. So I know what you mean. That's why I don't really like them playing together for Italy, one on the right, one on the left. Personally,
Yeah,
to
I
me,
don't think you
it's
have
either
both
or,
ones.
and I would go with
Yeah.
Chiesa on the basis that Zaniolo hasn't done enough, if you ask me. But I think
I
right
quite
wing
like
is a problem
Zaniolo.
position for Italy. I really do.
I mean, for me, I prefer a Berardi type of player. You know,
Yeah. So that's a miss.
Please
for
still
his
my beating
summer.
heart.
yeah,
This-
like
so
that is what we love,
I think
right?
that's the question I need to get to both of you then is,
Mm.
do you see Federico Chiesa having a role this summer for Italy? And if so, what would you like that role to be for Italy? Like, do you see him starting? Do you think he's just that impact player off the bench? What do you think is...
Am I Spalletti or is this Patrick Kendrick talking?
Give us Patrick Kendrick.
Okay, well, my opinion doesn't count for much, but if it were me, I would have him coming off the bench as an impact player.
Me
But
too.
I think that's a huge call because then you're basically inferring that someone is more qualified than him to start the game, and you're saying Italy have a better left winger in terms of pure talent and potential. I don't think they necessarily do. Although what Claudio Ranieri said recently about an exclusive with the Tinkerman. What Claudio Ranieri said recently about Nicolas Viola really sort of struck a chord with me. He basically, because Viola scored 5 goals off the bench, and there was a lot of clamour, why is he not starting? And Ranieri said he's in the autumn of his career, which is obviously not true of Chiesa, albeit he has had some injuries. And he said he's intelligent enough to understand that he can make more of an impact off the bench. And why would I play him against, fresh defences when I can play him against tired defences? I apologise if I made that point already. I'm getting a bit of deja vu here, so maybe I've made that point before. But I can see a similar argument with Chiesa. If you've got these games which are very tight and both teams are expending not only a lot of physical energy, but mental energy as well. If you can bring on Chiesa like that and literally just get the ball to him every single time on the left and say, run at people. And either he loses the ball or he beats his man, or maybe they double up on him and Spalletti works with them and say, okay, when you see they're doubling up on you, shift it quickly inside and then we'll switch it to the other side. We've got an overload. So I wouldn't start him. I'd have him come off as an impact player. I think Spalletti will start him. That's my hunch, to be honest.
Mina?
It's the lack of alternatives. There's just not that many. Great.
I think there's many. It's just whether or not they're good enough.
Yeah,
there's a lot
put
of
it that
names,
way.
actually.
He's better
Yeah.
than.
But
Yeah,
no, I feel like there's a lot of right wingers. I don't know how many left wingers there are, though. Do you know what I mean?
That's fair.
If you're
That's
playing
fair.
inverted, I mean, because
who is the starting?
I mean,
who is the
so-
starting trident? Or
Here's how we're conceiving it, right? So I'm imagining it's 2 trequartista behind a striker is what I'm imagining.
I had a
Exactly.
4-3-3.
yeah, me too.
Oh,
I had a 4-3-3 in my
I was
head too.
thinking, I'd like to see the back three, but maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to see the back
You
three.
could be right, but where does
Yeah.
Chiesa fit in the 3-5-2? That's been the issue all season with Juventus. Second striker?
What is it, a 3-5-2
Or you want to play
or is it like a
3-4-3 or
3-4-2-1?
3-4-2-1?
Yeah.
I don't like very
I think
narrow.
there's quite a lot of players in that conversation, right? You've got Pellegrini, obviously, who's been mentioned. You've got Politano. You've got Chiesa.
Oh, no,
You've
I
got
hate
even
Politano.
someone like El Shaarawy for the season he's had at Roma. You've
Stop!
got
I'm
Zaccagni.
depressed.
There's a lot of names, but are they great names? That's the question.
No,
None of them
are
seem to be-
great.
The way I feel about the back three is I think Spalletti played it in a couple of meaningless games in March to appease all the clamour that there was around. We've got all these teams that play with a back three. The Italian champions play in a back three. I don't see him going to a back three.
Really?
I see him
think he
playing a
will.
4-3-3. And
I think he'll
because
start with
I-
4-3-3, Nikki. I think
I
3-5-2
see
will
Di
be up
Lorenzo
his.
at right back. I think he'll pick Mancini and Bastoni, or Mancini and Acerbi possibly. And then I think he'll play Di Marco as left back. That's the way I see him doing it. And then I think he'll have a bit more of a workman-like midfield, because someone needs to, certainly on the left-hand side, someone needs to work hard to make up for Di Marco's defensive deficiencies. And then I think he'll play Chiesa on the left, whoever it's going to be on the right, maybe Zaniolo at this stage, because while Politano's had a good season, he's not really played much for Italy, and then Scamacca centre forward. So I don't see him veering away from that. I take your
it's a
point, but
terrible
I think
team.
otherwise it sounds like you're favouring a system for the defence, but then everyone else within the system doesn't necessarily fit. I mean, you can't have El Shaarawy starting for Italy with the greatest of respect. You can't have Politano starting as a number 10, nor Zaniolo. Do you know what I mean? I feel like if you're going to play those players, you need to put them in. You need to put the square pegs in the square holes, or whatever the bloody mixed metaphors
Nikki,
are.
give me your 3-5-2, just so I can understand more about is it the one that is like, because I'm trying to remember, I'm looking at the one, there's the Venezuela or Ecuador, or both.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to. I need a minute before we're doing the full 11. I've got to
No, I mean, just to give you a clue, and I'm just trying to remember, against Ecuador, It was. I care more about the attack than I care about the defense.
Because I mean, the defense, as far as I'm concerned, is I support the idea of use as much of Inter's defense as you can, frankly, because it works. Like, don't mess with it; it works.
I agree.
And so then it is the.
So you play Darmian at right centre back.
I've got no problem with Darmian at right centre back.
Me too.
I think he's playing Champions League games in that role. Why not?
I think he's also pretty
drop
smart.
Di Lorenzo.
Yes, I would for sure drop Di Lorenzo for Darmian. Yeah,
probably form. Yeah,
I think he gets a really bad rap, Di Lorenzo. I mean, there's no one can thrive in that team this season, to be honest. But I think people have very short memories.
Which is totally fair, but I think that it's not a judgment on him as an all-around footballer. It's a judgment on what's going to do best this summer. And I think when you've got a formula that's working somewhere else, if you can, as a national team manager, just take that and go.
True, but Di Lorenzo ended up coming into the 2020 side because Florenzi got injured. He wasn't even supposed to start, and he was one of the best players in the tournament. That was a team that was working well with a back four. So, but then that's 3 years ago. So,
I always choose experience. I like Darmian, and I think that there's something about Di Lorenzo's mentality that I think when the team's falling, he's not somebody that can change it. Whereas I think Darmian is quite good in his leadership role.
Well, one's a Scudetto winning captain, the other's a bit part player for Inter. I mean, do you know what I mean? He is, though. He's a backup. He's a backup to Pavard now. Do you know what I mean? He played because Skriniar threw his toys out of his pram and then got injured. That's why he played. Yeah. He's a very good pro, and Dumfries is very inconsistent. So he's just like, he's never the first name on a team sheet, Darmian, to be honest. And I actually think he's better at right wing back than he is at right centre back. So I wouldn't have an argument with him playing at right wing back, but I think as right centre back, he's doing a job.
I agree
there.
about the wing back thing. I do really like him in that role a bit more than I prefer him as a centre back. I'm not. But okay, so listen, let's just put that aside. Yeah,
let's do it.
I think that's also there's no Udogie. I'm so upset about Udogie missing. So let's say we've got Cambiaso, Locatelli, throw in whoever you like.
A good player. Yeah.
Who would you then have? And as your, like you said, Nikki, that you like the idea of having a 2-1. So sort of two.
I don't know if I've even thought about it enough to say it's definitely what I like. I think that's just what I've been thinking it would be. Whether or not I'm right about it, I'm not sure.
Nikki, I've just thought that's a very good idea.
That mentioned have been considered recently, like Bonaventura. I don't want him to start, but he's been in that conversation. He's been part of the testing. And I don't think I even mentioned Raspadori before as well. Again, that Napoli team has done a great season, but he's part of that conversation.
He is. But what I would say about Raspadori, someone like that, is if you can't get in your club team, you should not be starting for the national team. To me, that's just a very firm principle. But I'm now reconsidering the double trequartista. Because if if he's the number 9, that's the way they play. Atalanta, they either play with 2 in the hole or 1 in the hole and 2 strikers. So I quite like that if you get someone close to him. But the thing is, can Pellegrini play that far forward? Because I think he's the best in terms of ability, but I think he's better almost coming from deeper. So a lot for Spalletti to work out.
I do think that's part of what you just touched on there, Patrick, is like, for me, it's like you sort of like fit certain like fixed points in that are non-negotiables basically at this point. And like, incredibly, and we should get onto him in this game, because if you'd asked me 2 months ago, this would not have been the case. But I think now Gianluca Scamacca is untouchable. I think that is literally starting number 9. Like nothing else is going to be considered because he's scoring goals left, right, and centre.
What about Retegui?
No,
I like Retegui as an option. I think he should be in the squad, but you can't start him ahead of Scamacca. How Scamacca's playing right now.
Retegui's an interesting one because he has consistently performed for Italy since he came into the side. He has. But he got his first goal since February against Milan at the weekend. It was a penalty.
Yeah.
Admittedly,
but Scamacca's going to be on his PlayStation, right? So
I think if Scamacca stays fit,
let the boy have his PlayStation. I'm okay.
Yeah, let him have his PlayStation.
I wish the tournament started tomorrow. I really do. The way Scamacca's, but the only thing I want now is for Scamacca to have as many matches as he can between now and the end of the season. That means Atalanta going to the Europa League final, an extra match there. You know, he's going to be fresh. It might actually be a blessing in disguise if he doesn't play in the Coppa Italia final because he's suspended. So then suddenly he's got this.
Yeah, but imagine he wins the Europa League final.
That's what I mean. Maybe he's got this burning desire to get them through that semi-final second leg against Marseille because he's like, well, I can't take part in the final of the Coppa Italia because I'm suspended. I can't remember if he even played against West Ham, for West Ham against Fiorentina, or if he came off the bench, or what happened with the Conference League last year. But I saw a still of him with the trophy the other day, and I thought, I remember you being a one-season flop, basically. But no, I think the Italy conversation is fascinating, and yeah.
Would you really? None of you would start Zaniolo, so none of you would have him in your team.
Mm.
I really like Zaniolo in the team. I think he adds physicality. I think he adds pace, and for me, I think he's.
Is he going to track back? Is he going to get booked after 5 minutes?
Patrick, it's interesting that tracking back. You love Leao. You know, some players don't need to track back. You know.
Oh, Rafa was appalling. I know we're going to get on to Milan later, but I had no defence. I was really. What's the word? Quite catty on my commentary about Milan.
Were you?
I was a little bit Schadenfreude, yeah. And I was both barrels for Leão, unfortunately. And I think maybe deep down you'd conditioned me slightly. I think I was defending him to the hilt, and I was like, "Look, I've done so much for you, spreading the word via the Serie A Chronicles, and then you let me down like this." Et tu, Brute. Do you know what I mean? So,
you know what? Imagine he replied to your commentary with your tweet before being like,
he should.
Everyone.
He should. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I need to clip something up and say, "What do you think about this, Rafa?" Yeah, it was appalling.
I feel like we're getting a little bit unstructured, which is fine because the games this weekend, as we've said, we're not.
Why have we not spoken about Sassuolo Inter?
Well, we will get to that. I wanted, since we've touched on
it really necessary at this point.
Yes.
I just feel like they're on holiday now.
We'll get Sassuolo Inter. We maybe even should have gone there first. We haven't. We've gone to Scamacca first. I just want to touch on this quickly because I haven't. Scamacca now. I think I've just counted this right. 10 goals in the last 12 games. But
Correct.
I think it's not just the fact of scoring the number of goals, which needs to be highlighted. He scored in both legs against Sporting. He scored twice away to Liverpool. He scored in the first leg of the Europa League semi-final away to Marseille. He's scoring in the big games as well. He really is in this extraordinary run of form. It was really interesting watching Atalanta against Atalanta this weekend. Of course, they won, which is a big result for them, keeps him on track for that Champions League spot through the league.
They're worrying me.
It wasn't a great performance all around. They fell behind early to a team that's already relegated. I think they're a really mixed group at the moment, and I think that when you watching them, for me in this game, I really felt that Ademola Lookman, who I like and who has been really good for them at times, despite the fact he has actually scored a couple of goals recently, he just looks like he's in one of those phases where he's trying to do too much. He's trying too hard to make things happen. It's not happening for him. Whereas you look at someone like Scamacca and it looks like he just, whatever he does turns to gold right now. And the same for Koopmeiners. And not surprising that those are the two players who turned the game around and got Atalanta 3 points. Since we just talked about Roma, to just say what the situation is, Roma sixth on 60 points. Atalanta notionally ahead of them, but same points. They have a game in hand. Bologna now on 64 points in fourth place. So Atalanta's game in hand is a big one. There's been a whole series of catty back and forths, which we probably don't need to go into, about the fact that game got delayed. Of course, that was the game against Fiorentina that was delayed because of Joe Barone's illness and then death. So a pretty significant reason why that game got delayed. But the fact that it hasn't been rescheduled still seems to be getting under some people's skin. But that will have a big influence on that race for the top five. Was there anything else you wanted to say about that? Because we should talk about Inter Sassuolo, but I don't have anything else you guys wanted to touch on those games.
Yes, a couple of things. To me, it's the variety of Scamacca's goals as well. Just quickly, whilst we continue our loving of Scamacca, you know, he scored that back. He scored that back heel at Empoli earlier on in the season. He had a disallowed goal against Fiorentina in the cup where he smashed it into the roof of the net before then scoring a legitimate goal with a scissor kick. I remember a goal while he was at Sassuolo against Napoli at the Mapei a few years ago. There's a cross in from the left. He chested it down, spun around and volleyed it in. It was not dissimilar to the James Rodriguez goal or James, if you prefer to call him that, for Colombia years ago. And the only other thing I'd say on Atalanta and Roma is the tiebreaker, unless it's for relegation places or the top two positions, is head-to-head results still. So they still have to play against each other this Sunday night in Bergamo. I seem to recall the reverse fixture was 1 each. So if Roma beat Atalanta, they would have a superior head-to-head result. They would therefore go 3 ahead of Atalanta. And even if Atalanta were to win that game in hand against Fiorentina, Roma would finish above them if they were to finish level on points. So Roma have to... And ironically, Roma wanted an extra day. They wanted the game pushed back to Monday. It couldn't be pushed back to the Monday because Atalanta involved on the Wednesday in the Coppa Italia final. So I think Roma, they need to decide whether they really believe they can win by 2 goals in Leverkusen to take that game to extra time, or whether they think, we've had a good run in the Europa League, let's now qualify for the Champions League by beating Atalanta and finishing strongly in the league. So I'm very intrigued by Thursday's matches.
I can't imagine De Rossi not wanting to go for everything. I don't think he's one of those people that budgets. It's part of the reason why he's quickly become my favorite coach. Like I'm in awe of him, and I know this team is somewhat slowed down a little bit. Exhaustion is kicking in. It's been a tough calendar for them, and I didn't see a very good performance. Actually, we didn't even talk about the match because we went straight into discussing whether or not Chiesa was going to play for Italy.
Yeah, we did. Was there more you want to say on that?
I guess it's a case of like a lot of people are like, oh well, Roma's slowing down. I'm like, yeah, but look at the calendar. Like it becomes hard, and I feel like a lot of great teams have slowed down towards the end of the season. I mean, Milan and Juventus have fallen off a cliff. And so I think it's normal, but I do think that he's a coach who he's bringing out the best in a lot of players that I didn't imagine. And so I look at this team and I think, I can't imagine that he will look on Thursday night and say, we've already lost this. Do we just give up on it? Because there is this weird passion inside of him that's desperate to do something glorious. So it is like, let's try for the comeback. I do think he's going to do that. If that ends up being... So this is where I hate Italian football, because a lot of the times what we enjoy so much, like all we ever talk about is that, we're pragmatic in the way that we approach things, right? Like if somebody actually goes for it, it's exciting if they win. And if they don't, it's you should have thought better. But then you encourage everyone to be very attacking. You encourage everyone to go for everything. And when they do, and it's a risk because they could fail, they're always getting criticized. All coaches just get ridiculously criticized all the time. So if he doesn't go for it and accepts that this is a loss to Bayer Leverkusen, I feel like the papers will murder him. And if he doesn't, then it's you should have thought better, because it's more important to qualify for the Champions League because you've already lost that. So I almost think it's a no-win situation for him, and I think this is the situation that we get to in Italian football. And so this is why I think that he's going to go for both of them, really.
I think that's a great point that you make, actually, Mina, because the one thing that he can be sort of judged in favourably in comparison to Mourinho is if he were to go out of the Europa League in the semi-final. So I think he at least wants to match what Mourinho did by making the final of the Europa League. And there's also the added motivation. Wouldn't you really want to become the first team to beat Bayer Leverkusen this season? So even if you lose 1-0 in the second leg, you still end their unbeaten run. I mean, then they'll come back and say, well, actually, we still went through in the ties. So it's technically, statistically a defeat, but it didn't count for anything. So I think I agree with you. They'll try and win that game, score early, albeit I read that Allegri advised him that they can wait at least until the hour mark before scoring their first goal.
No, he didn't say that. He just said you don't need to rush into scoring straight away, as in you still have until don't worry about it if you haven't scored in the first half. There's still the second half, and you can just score early.
Keep it 0-0 till the hour mark.
Allegri's mentality is don't worry if you haven't scored in the second half either, or next game.
Exactly.
Allegri did that against Tottenham, and it's my favorite game of them, because they didn't score till the end, and they knocked them out, and it was brilliant to watch. So.
I'm going to
knock them out when they least expected. Yes.
I'm going to resist for once making a mean comment about Tottenham. I will move on. I will move on to Sassuolo against Inter. Sassuolo won Inter 0 on Saturday night. On the surface, it's a result that's all at once extraordinary and not extraordinary, because Sassuolo are in the relegation zone, 19th in the table, have been mostly pretty bad this season. They did bring in Davide Ballardini, relegation expert, to save the day, and it has not really turned things around. On the other hand, this is the 22nd time that Sassuolo have played Inter since coming back to Serie A in 2013 in the league, and this is their 10th win in those games. So the series is exactly evenly split, 10 wins each and 2 draws after this one. So in that sense, you could call it predictable. And also, perhaps, in some other senses, some more cynical people think it was predictable. Patrick, I know you don't like this argument at all.
Raging. Because I think it does a disservice to so many people. It does.
Do you want to explain it, by the way? Sorry, before
yes.
a bit more.
So basically, unfortunately, there's this term Scanswolo, which is an alternative name for Sassuolo. The idea that they scansare, they just sort of down tools and just sort of, But at various times, it's claimed that Sassuolo love Juventus and just sort of roll out the red carpet for Juventus, and they've got it in occasionally for Milan, but at all times, Andrea Consigli, apparently, according to Inter fans, plays terribly all season before becoming Superman every time that Inter come to town. It's a nonsense, basically. What it is I think Inter frequently are guilty of hubris and they underestimate Sassuolo. Down the years, that's happened many times. And I think a lot of it is borne out of the fact that even the Inter side, which was part of that terrible run of 6 or 7 seasons, Sassuolo first came up in 2013-14. I've got a soft spot for Sassuolo because they came up to Serie A for the first time when I moved over to Milan and started commentating on Serie A. So I've literally seen their progress throughout. And I'm a big fan of Domenico Berardi, but I think Sassuolo, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, right? This is a town it's a very small town. They play in neighbouring Reggio Emilia. Reggiana have a greater history and fan base and whatever. And they're outnumbered almost every home game they play, especially when they play against the big boys, right? So already people are writing them off, saying that they haven't won all season. The only game, Inter haven't lost all season. The only game that Inter have lost has come against Sassuolo. But I just thought that it was quite provocative, the Inter fans saying, you're going to go back down to Serie B, which, again, you can make the point that happens the world over in football. Fan bases try and rile one another up. But I thought Inter did everything in their power in the lead up to this game to make it, to give Sassuolo motivation, to be honest. They played a mixed bag of a team. And I hate this notion that there's foul play at play, that there's match fixing involved, because it does a disservice to the 22 players that went out there. Are you seriously trying to tell me that because Giovanni Carnevali, who's the Sassuolo CEO, is supposedly on good terms with Beppe Marotta, who's his Inter counterpart, that Marotta says to Lautaro Martinez, oh, by the way, Inter, make sure you lose this game. And Lautaro goes into the dressing room and says to people like Pavard and other players who are at the club for the first season, say, oh, by the way, we've been instructed to lose this game. It's a disgrace. It's a ridiculous insinuation. And all it does is damage to the Italian game. And to be honest, I'm sick of it.
Okay, can you guys wind back? Because I feel like I don't know this. I didn't understand this.
Yeah,
So what's going on? Are the fans saying that, are Inter fans saying that Sassuolo are cheating or they're cheating?
Listen,
No, Milan and Juventus fans are saying that Inter deliberately lost the game to do a favour to Sassuolo as some sort of deferred payment on Fratesi, who they got for a cut price deal.
Oh, is that? Oh, I didn't know
Oh,
this. By
it's
the way.
proper deep conspiracy theories. But also, can we just look at something as well? This is what's driven me mad as well all season about the whole who's better, this season's Inter or last season's Napoli, and people using bizarre metrics like Inter are going to finish with 100 points. Napoli only got 90. Of course, Napoli only got 90. They won the league with 5 games to spare. Inter have won the league with 5 games to spare. What happens when you win the league? You party because you beat Milan. You party because you beat Torino. And by the way, you only beat Torino because they got a red card in the second half. Otherwise, it's ending 0-0 that game. Then what happens? You don't have any motivation. Make what you want about we can finish with 101 points, or we're going to go 45 games in which you've scored consecutively, or we're going to concede fewer than 20 goals against.
Wait, what's
Juventus
this conspiracy
twice.
theory?
No, my point is, sorry, it's a very long-winded point. This is not a conspiracy theory. My point is that could we not consider that Sassuolo, who are 4 games away from being relegated for the first ever time from Serie A since they came up, could we not concede possibly Sassuolo, who, by the way, as Nikki said, have beaten Inter 9 times in the past, might have a bit more motivation than a team that have been partying for 2 weeks since they won the derby? Could we not concede that?
Absolutely.
Inter barely had an opportunity in the second half because the players can't be bothered. They've got one eye on the Euro. It's an away game. They travelled on the day. Ordinarily, they would travel the night before. You take your foot off. You cannot have the same motivation. It's human, and I don't blame Inter for that. So I think all this stuff about the only way you get 100-point seasons or 98-point seasons is when you have teams like Liverpool and Manchester City who are pushing each other all the way, and you have to win every single game so as you win the league. If you win the league with 5 games to spare, then your level drop off. And Inter might
Juventus.
Exactly, and Inter might well drop off. They might lose at Frosinone on Friday as well, because Frosinone have an objective. They're trying to stay up. So I just thought it was very cruel to Sassuolo. I thought it was quite rude to Inter, questioning their professionalism. It's not a good look. We've had match fixing in the past in Italy, so I understand why people go there. But it's not conducive to the game moving on from those scandals of the past. When every time we get an unexpected result, that happens in the Premier League. People say the beauty of the Premier League, anyone can beat anyone. In Italy, it's like, how dare Inter lose at Sassuolo? It's a nonsense, and it did my head in.
I think I was going to say the sort of the things that give the lie to this for me is Lautaro does score in the first half, and it's disallowed for a narrow offside. I mean, did Lautaro time his run perfectly to make sure he was that fraction offside so that it wasn't going to count? Like, there's stuff like that. And I think the point you made about going into the dressing room, I mean, do I really believe that, like you said, players like Pavard and I mean, Alexis Sanchez, who I think probably out of everyone looked like he was running around like like Alexis Sanchez does in that first half. Are they really sort of going, yeah, sure, don't worry about it. We'll make sure we don't win this game.
Is this not just a normal thing that happens, like when a team wins? That I mean, I know that you.
Thank you.
I just remember that at the time when we were winning and Sassuolo were losing to us, people will say it's amazing how every time Juventus come around, Berardi is not playing, And I actually eventually started to be like, yeah, that is weird. Like, why is it that he's never playing against us? Like, maybe it's right, but it's just sort of the usual stuff that you throw to teams that are winning, right? Like, there's always some conspiracy theory as to why a team's winning.
He was on the pitch, and out of anyone, like, could I imagine someone looking at his old mates and going, "Oh, I don't really want to beat you"? Yeah, I can imagine someone doing that if they've already got their thing done, like being on the pitch and sort of in a personal way going, "Oh, I don't really want to make you guys suffer."
Someone that's barely started this season. I don't think so.
Exactly.
I think he thinks, I want to score, I want to prove. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I need to be starting for Italy. I need to prove to Inzaghi that I should be starting the odd game ahead of Barella or Mkhitaryan. And it also brings me... Yeah, absolutely. And it also brings me back to what other people were saying. Do you remember the final Juventus title win? Of course you do, of the 9 in a row under Sarri, right? I think they ended up finishing 1 point clear of Inter because Juventus won it with 3 or 4 games to spare and lost their remaining matches. And I've heard people since say, "Oh, well, Inter have been the best team in 5 years because they were second in that year and they were 1 point behind." It's like, have some intellectual honesty, please.
Yeah,
they were also rans. They were, in the same way that Milan, if Milan are to win, and they won't because they're now 6 without a win for their last across all competitions. But if Milan were to win out all their games and Inter were to play the reserves and lose all their games, you can't then look at the final table and say, "Oh, it's close." It wasn't close, and it's and that's what I don't like as well.
Like,
it's just,
isn't this something that, like, as in they were saying this about Bayern as well? But that Bayern is supposed to be, obviously they're playing Real Madrid tomorrow. They lost over the weekend, and people are like, "Well, look at them. Obviously they're going to lose. They lost over the weekend." Yeah, but the league's already been won. They've got nothing to play for in the domestic. They don't care if they finish second or third. It doesn't matter anymore. They care more about what they're going to do in the Champions League. So this is not how you rate teams. It's exactly like Sarri's team. The team completely fell off at the end because they just didn't need to care anymore. Just like Juventus fell off last year when they realized that they'd been deducted points, that it's hard to get back on. And so I do feel like a lot of the times when people... This is a lot about nothing, if that makes sense. This is much ado about nothing. It's a very Italian thing, and it's just constant conspiracy theories on why things happen.
There was actually, I thought, quite an interesting point. Probably should move on from this game at some point because I worry I'm dragging us on too long with this conversation now. But I thought it was quite an interesting point from Paolo Condo during the week as well, saying that he wondered if Juventus, who themselves had this very uneven season where they started brilliantly and then faded away, almost in some ways hurt Inter's prospects of winning more than just the league, because Inter felt so compelled early in the season because the pace Juventus was going was so fast to put all of their focus on the league and make sure that they were staying ahead in that race. And perhaps some of those team selections in the Champions League group stage against Sociedad, when perhaps they should have been focusing on those games, making sure they won their group, didn't get drawn against Atletico Madrid in the Champions League. If they'd had their focus a bit more even then, they still would have won the league and have kept something back.
I agree with that.
It's really like...
I see it the other way.
Yeah.
I see it the other way. No, because I think, and I mean, what you're just saying about how Juventus last season, they punted everything because they knew they had the points penalty. I think Juventus, as soon as they didn't have motivation this season, that's why they've been so bad in the second half of the season. Yes, they were overperforming and overachieving the first half of the season. They're underperforming and underachieving the second half of the season. But I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think until Milik gets that red card, because then not only did they draw that game, Inter win the next day in Florence, and then Inter win the Derby d'Italia. I think those 2 matches, basically Juventus, they lost belief that they could do it. They were really sort of, and I think as long as Inter were being pushed all the way by Juventus, then I think they had more chance of actually winning that Champions League match because it keeps your focus and your level high.
So you're saying Juventus
for either way.
So what are you saying about Inter's Champions League? Sorry, that Juve...
I'm saying that Inter would have had a better chance of going deeper in the Champions League had the title race been pushing them all the way and not been, because it was early on in February, and I think they played the second leg in late February against Atletico Madrid. It was early on in February when it became clear that Inter were going to win the title quite comfortably, because Juventus threw away. They drew against Empoli, they lost to Inter, they lost at home to Udinese, and they drew against Verona. They took 2 points from 4 matches in a row, whilst Inter won those matches.
Better. I don't even know how to say that better. Look, I think that when it becomes easier, like it is for Napoli, there is the potential sometimes towards the end of the season where you drop off when you have nothing to fight for. You know, I do think that can happen. I do feel had Juventus been in the race for longer, then I wonder what would have happened to Inter. I think they would have won more or done better. I do think sometimes when you are constantly on your edge and you feel like someone's chasing you, it makes you better because you start to remember how it is to fight in every single game. And that, I agree with that entirely.
That's what I was
so
saying,
with this, I absolutely agree with you. And I think sometimes when you don't have anything to go for, it just becomes harder. Like you've just partied. For them to lose against Sassuolo, I think was entirely possible because also a lot of bets came in for Sassuolo, which tells you a lot of people felt that could go this way because they had partied all week. It's a very normal thing to do. So but I do feel like we need title challenges that are very close so that our teams could continue getting better. And Juventus was so good because they were fighting at the start of the season. When they lost the will to fight because they felt like they couldn't win anything, look at the exhaustion. Look how awful they've been because they're actually a very mediocre team. So what was holding it together was the fight. Without the fight, got nothing.
Not a lot of particularly
Milan's fight. Should we talk about that?
Huge games jumping out, but there was the Milan 3, Genoa 3.
I love Genoa.
A game which perhaps noteworthy as well for. There's 6 goals scored in the game, but also noteworthy for the Curva going on strike, walking out. This big statement released by the Curva Sud as well, talking about basically what they see as an abdication from the club's leadership in the 2 years since winning the title, accusations of not wanting to take a project forward, not making what even the intentions are the project clear. That's sort of a lack of statement, and also attacking the club for, in their opinion, not having a strong enough voice. So when, in the opinion of the Curva, when there've been refereeing decisions go against them or situations like that, they're angry about not having someone exactly as Patrick just says, someone like Marotta who will speak for the club and speak up for them. Patrick, take it away if you have a thought on this one.
It was a weird occasion, the whole Milan game, because part of the fan base are going on strike. We know that the ultras can intimidate other sections of support. So I think it's quite nasty, to be honest. I think if you're a Milan fan, you get to go to one game a season. You'd be pretty miffed if you go along and the ultras have decided that actually today we don't cheer, today we're on strike. Do you know what I mean? So, and then you're made to feel guilty if you want that. But it's difficult for Pioli. I think he's not going to jump before he's pushed. He's still got a year left on his contract. So, everyone wants the end of the season to come now for Milan. That was evident from their performance. I thought the way Tomori dived into that challenge after 3 minutes is another reason why Gareth Southgate doesn't pick him. And I think anytime there's clamour for Tomori to be in the England squad, sometimes people overlook how he can have these awkward moments. And it was lethargic, lackluster from Milan. No one really wanted to be there. Rafael Leao put in his worst Milan performance that I can recall. Was taken off, slunked off behind Pioli without shaking his hand straight down to the dressing room, was booed by the fans. And I feel some sympathy with the fans, but equally I think only one team can win. And you had your time 2 years ago. It was Napoli's time last season. It's Inter's time
next season.
This year. If Inter go on a win... Whee! That's fighting talk. I love that. I do think if Inter were to win the next season and the year after that, and they were to win 4 in a row, and Milan were to be also Rans, then I can understand a bit more dissenting voices. But I think, unfortunately, and we always come back to this point, Milan, they won the Scudetto under Pioli. They got to a Champions League semi-final the following season. They were runners-up either side of their... They were runners-up the year before their title win, champions the next. The year after that, they made the Champions League semi-final. There was constant progress. They had some good years under Pioli. And I think, unfortunately, this is a club that should feel entitled because of their history, 7 European Cups and so on and so forth. But they need to remember where they came from. And also, the problem will always be it's viewed through the prism of the Milan rivalry. So if they'd gone out in the Champions League semi-final to Bayern or Real Madrid or whoever, it wouldn't be a problem. They went out to Inter. This season, they might finish second. They probably will finish second. They finished second to Inter. And that's what it comes down to. And so until you get away from that, until Inter come third and Milan finish above them again, it's going to be like this.
I
mean,
yeah, I guess, listen, I always think of myself like, I don't know how much I agree with fan bases sometimes, because whenever I think of a club as if I was the owner and what I would do. So I tend to side a little bit more with ownership than I do sometimes with the fans. Yeah. And here's the thing, like I do feel sometimes it's like fan bases. One of the things that I really hate about analysis is that a lot of the times, like, for example, when Milan lost to Liverpool, it was like, oh, this is the great Milan. Like, you didn't even put up a fight. And I'm like, okay, but it's not the Milan of Shevchenko. So, like, chill out, you know? Like, I thought the analysis was so poor because they weren't taking into account the team that was being presented by Milan and all of that. But I think the fans are guilty of the same thing. So I agree with Patrick. In many ways, it's like, this is a team that has been consistently fourth or fifth in terms of budget and spending. It's been less than Roma. I think that they've done a lot for that kind of budget considering, and yet they're being judged by their name right now. It's like, well, you're Milan and we expect more. On the one hand, I sort of respect that because as fan bases, we always demand so much from our teams, especially when you have great history, right? But there is something to be said. For example, I'm thinking now of like Liverpool. Like if I'm a Liverpool fan and I've just watched this team like do so well and then just drop off a cliff and now like, you know, there's arguments on the pitch line between between the best player and between the coach, then I'm going to have a lot to say. If this was an Italian fan base, they would be like protests galore. Like, how could you throw it away? And what is, I mean, how could Liverpool lose to Atalanta? The shame of it. Oh my God, look at how much we're paying. It would be nonsensical. It would be all over the Gazzetta headlines about how they threw it away. And yet what Liverpool did and what the fans did was hold their hands up and say, Atalanta were better. We'll move on. We have other targets. We'll try to rebuild. We'll try to be better. But we just don't have that.
It's an interesting comparison because there was a lack of flags the night that Atalanta went to the Cop. That was a whole sort of subplot that I think didn't get as much pick up in Italy as there was a whole fan. But I think part of that was because actually Liverpool just expected to get through that round, and some fans later regretted.
Sorry, they didn't hold enough. What can you reply that? Can you repeat?
It wasn't a full walkout like what Milan did, but there was a decision by fans on the Cop to I can't remember the full context of what that was about, so you'll have to forgive me on that one and ask a Liverpool journalist, but there was definitely a sort of mini fan protest going on during that Liverpool-Atalanta game, which is why we didn't get.
But here's the thing, like a lot of whenever they do lose or whenever stuff happens, no one's ever demanding Klopp be resigning or Klopp move on. And I just feel like this is the constant thing we have. Like they lose two matches and Inzaghi should be out in Inter. Oh, how dare you? You know, like this is just hideous. You only reached the Champions League final. You couldn't put up a fight in the Scudetto. You should go. You should walk out the door. It's again the same thing. Oh, purely you didn't manage to overachieve with 10-year rivals and a salary budget that's lower than the top teams in Italy. Like you should be out the door. Oh, Juventus, you're paying loads of salary because you have been so financially mismanaged, but you have a really crap team actually that's like got loads of absences in the key parts. Again, it's never judged based on what you have. Now, there's one thing to be saying is that I do think there's something wrong in the ownership and the constant changes. I don't agree with the sacking of people like Maldini. You wonder as well about their ambitions for the club because they are more or less a club that seem to care a lot more about media than they seem to care about what's on the pitch. And that is by look at the players that they're targeting. Yes, sure, they're not in there for going for like £100 million players. They're in there to try to create a sustainable project. You may disagree with that when you're Milan because you've never been a sustainable project. So I get that. I get that protest and more power to them. But at the end of the day, you also can't start blaming people when you're asking more than they can produce. At the end of the day, this is how much you can pay. So you can't expect players to overachieve all the time. Your players are players I didn't hear about before. I didn't know who Reinders was. I didn't know, or I didn't watch these guys on a regular basis to think they're going to come in and start beating like Barella and Lautaro Martinez, who's just won a World Cup. So I do think there's a lot that we're not judging based on reality, but rather on history. And while this is who we are and this is our name and this is what we expect, this is where it gets really annoying to watch. And then it's also the media. Isn't this the end of the cycle? How hideous is this tactical? Like, yes, I get it, but there's so much to look into this. There's so much to analyze in this, and I don't think anything is ever properly analyzed. It's only dramatic, hysterical reactions all the time, and it's starting to get really tiring. It's making me actually not like the league anymore.
So, in conclusion, Pioli out, sack the board, get rid of the stadium, and let's chat about actually the place that Pioli has been linked to, Napoli. They drew 1-1 against Udinese. I thought this was actually a really interesting game in one sense, not a overstated if I say really interesting game, but I think it was what intrigued me about this game was that Napoli actually did carry the game to Udinese. We've talked about teams that have perhaps put their feet up. I didn't feel like that with Napoli. I thought they actually dominated this game. Osimhen put the ball in the net twice. Second one was rightly disallowed, but it could easily have been a Napoli win, and then we wouldn't have been talking about these end of season biscotti and teams at the top not putting up as much fight as they should. But in the end, Udinese did get the goal back and equalise. Osimhen, I'm finding a fascinating little mini case study right now because he looks like he is done. He wants to leave,
Yes.
but he also doesn't want to stop scoring goals because he's Osimhen. So he's out there chasing the ball and putting the ball in. But at the end of the game, his body language is just like, just the body language of someone who's counting down each game one at a time into let's get out of here. I'll be very surprised if he's back next season. I've mentioned Salernitana against Atalanta. Torino drew 0-0 with Bologna. Was the 75th year anniversary of the Superga air disaster. Another moving tribute over the weekend. Verona won 2-1 against Fiorentina. Big win for them. Big win for them in the relegation fight as well. Monza drew 2-2 with Lazio, which probably I think we can stop talking about Lazio in that top 5 conversation now. Cagliari, Lecce 1-1 and Empoli Frosinone also 0-0.
Guys, I just want to tell you, if you are listening,
Yes.
that before the pod started, we talked about doing a shorter pod because we didn't have that much to talk about. We've ended up on 15 different rants. I've given up on Italian football. Patrick's had enough of the. It's incredible, and I think this might just be the longest pod yet. Thank you anyway for listening to us rant on about all the different things that have happened this week. I am hoping for some more excitement next week, but it just seems to be a little bit exhausting at the moment. I just don't want to see any more draws. But either way, thank you for listening to us. We will be back next Tuesday. Please find us on all our socials. All our links are in the show notes. And let's hope and pray that Roma managed to get some big win and a comeback, and Atalanta can do something special. Thanks to Patrick Kendrick. Thanks to Nikki Bandini and her wonderful hosting. I'm Mina Rizuki. Over and out.
Serie Chronicles is a Maya Chronicles production.
Tried to move us on quicker, and then I realised
was
that
fun.
I enjoyed it today. It's quite good going just.
It's actually
off
much
script,
nicer when we have a discussion than when we
passionate.
actually are just. It's much nicer like this, I think. Anyway, it's more fun for me anyway.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation all the way through. It was.